At length the seashore was gained, and Falkner at last placed on the deck of the vessel, reposing after the torture which, despite every care, the journey had inflicted. Already Elizabeth believed that he was saved, and yet one glance at his wan face and emaciated figure reawakened every fear. He looked, and all around believed him to be a dying man. Chapter 11. Arrived at Zante, placed in a cool and pleasant chamber, attended by a skillful surgeon, and watched over by the unsleeping vigilance of Elizabeth, Falkner slowly receded from the shadow of death, whose livid hue had sat upon his countenance. Still health was far. His wound was attended by bad symptoms, and the fever eluded every attempt to dislodge it from his frame. He was but half saved from the grave. Emaciated and feeble, his disorder even tried to vanquish his mind, but that resisted with more energy than his prostrate body. The death he had gone out to seek he awaited with courage, yet he no longer expressed an impatience of existence, but struggled to support with manly fortitude at once the inroads of disease and the long-nourished sickness of his soul. It had been a hard trial to Elizabeth to watch over him, while each day the surgeon's serious face gave no token of hope. But she would not despond, and in the end his recovery was attributed to her careful nursing. She never quitted his apartment except for a few hours' sleep, and even then her bed was placed in the chamber adjoining his. If he moved, she was roused and at his side, divining the cause of his uneasiness and alleviating it. There were other nurses about him, and Vasily, the most faithful of all, but she directed them and brought that discernment and tact of which a woman only is capable. Her little soft hands smoothed his pillow, or placed upon his brow, cooled and refreshed him. She scarcely seemed to feel the effects of sleepless nights and watchful days. Every minor sensation was merged in the hope and resolution to preserve him. Several months were passed in a state of the utmost solicitude. At last he grew a little better, the fever intermitted, and the wound gave signs of healing. On the first day that he was moved to an open alcove, and felt some enjoyment from the soft air of evening, all that Elizabeth had gone through was repaid. She sat on a low cushion near, and his thin fingers, now resting on her head, now playing with the ringlets of her hair, gave token by that caress that though he was silent and his look abstracted, his thoughts were occupied upon her. At length he said, "Elizabeth, you have again saved my life." She looked up with a quick, glad look, and her eyes brightened with pleasure. "You have saved my life twice," he continued, "and through you, it seems, I am destined to live. I will not quarrel again with existence, since it is your gift. I will hope, prolonged as it has been by you, that it will prove beneficial to you. I have but one desire now, it is to be the source of happiness to you." "Live, dear father, live, and I must be happy," she exclaimed. "God grant that it prove so," he replied, pressing her hand to his lips. "The prayers of such as I too often turn to curses, but you, my own dearest, must be blessed, and as my life is preserved, I must hope that this is done for your sake, and that you will derive some advantage from it." "Can you doubt it?" said Elizabeth. "Could I ever be consoled if I lost you? I have no other tie on earth, no other friend, nor do I wish for any. Only put aside your cruel thoughts of leaving me forever, and every blessing is mine. Dear, generous, faithful girl, yet the time will come when I shall not be all in all to you, and then will not my name, my adoption, prove a stumbling block to your wishes." "How could that happen?" she said. "But do not, dear father, perplex yourself with looking either forward or backward. Repose on the present, which has nothing in it to annoy you, or rather your gallantry, your devotion to the cause of an injured people, must inspire you with feelings of self-gratulation and speak peace to your troubles. Let the rest of your life pass away as a dream. Banish quite those thoughts that have hitherto made you wretched. Your life is saved despite yourself. Accept existence as an immediate gift from heaven, and begin life from this moment with new hopes, new resolves. Whatever your error was, which you so bitterly repent, it belonged to another state of being. Your remorse, your resignation has effaced it, or if any evil results remain, you will rather exert yourself to repair them than uselessly to lament." "To repair my error, my crime," cried Falkner in an altered voice, while a cloud gathered over his face. "No, no, that is impossible. Never, till we meet in another life, can I offer reparation to the dead. But I must not think of this now. It is too ungrateful to you to dwell upon thoughts which would deliver me over to the tomb. Yet one thing I would say. I left a short detail in England of the miserable event that must at last destroy me, but it is brief and unsatisfactory. During my midnight watchings in Greece, I prepared a longer account. You know that little rosewood box, which even when dying I asked for, it is now close to my bed. The key is here attached to my watch chain. That box contains the narrative of my crime. When I die, you will read it and judge me. Never, never, exclaimed Elizabeth earnestly. Dear father, how cruelly you have tormented yourself by dwelling upon and writing about the past. And do you think that I would ever read accusations against you, the guardian angel of my life, even though written by yourself? Let me bring the box, let me burn the papers, let no word remain to tell of misery you repent and have atoned for. Falkner detained her, as she would have gone to execute her purpose. Not alone for you, my child, he said, did I write, though hereafter, when you hear me accused, it may be satisfactory to learn the truth from my own hand. But there are others to satisfy, an injured angel to be vindicated, a frightful mystery to be unveiled to the world. I have waited till I should die to fulfill this duty, and still, for your sake, I will wait. For while you love me and bear my name, I will not cover it with obloquy. But if I die, this secret must not die with me. I will say no more now, nor ask any promises. When the time comes, you will understand and submit to the necessity that urged me to disclosure. You shall be obeyed, I promise you, she replied. I will never set my reason above yours, except in asking you to live for the sake of the poor little thing you have preserved. Have I preserved you, dearest? I often fear I did wrong in not restoring you to your natural relations. In making you mine and linking you to my blighted fortunes, I may have prepared unnumbered ills for you. Oh, how sad a riddle is life! We hear of the straight and narrow path of right in youth, and we disdain the precept. And now would I were sitting among the nameless crowd on the common roadside, instead of wandering blindly in this dark desolation. And you, I have brought you with me into the wilderness of error and suffering. It was wrong, it was mere selfishness, yet who could foresee? Talk not of foreseeing, said Elizabeth soothingly, as she pressed his thin hand to her warm young lips. Think only of the present. You have made me yours forever. You cannot cast me off without inflicting real pangs of misery, instead of those dreamy ills you speak of. I am happy with you, attending on, being of use to you. What would you more? Perhaps it is so, replied Falkner, and your good and grateful heart will repay itself for all its sacrifices. I never can. Henceforth I will be guided by you, my Elizabeth. I will no longer think of what I have done, and what yet must be suffered, but wrap up my existence in you, live in your smiles, your hopes, your affections. This interchange of heartfelt emotions did good to both. Perplexed, nay, tormented by conflicting duties, Falkner was led by her entreaties to dismiss the most painful of his thoughts, and to repose at last on those more healing. The evil and the good of the day, he resolved, should henceforth be sufficient. His duty towards Elizabeth was a primary one, and he would restrict himself to the performing it. There is a magic in sympathy and the heart's overflowing that we feel as bliss, though we cannot explain it. This sort of joy Elizabeth felt after this conversation with her father. Their hearts had united, they had mingled thought and sensation, and the intimacy of affection that resulted was an ample reward to her for every suffering. She loved her benefactor with inexpressible truth and devotedness, and their entire and full interchange of confidence gave a vivacity to this sentiment, which of itself was happiness. Chapter 12. Though saved from immediate death, Falkner could hardly be called convalescent. His wound did not heal healthily, and the intermitting fever, returning again and again, laid him prostrate after he had acquired a little strength. After a winter full of danger, it was pronounced that the heats of a southern summer would probably prove fatal to him, and that he must be removed without delay to the bracing air of his native country. Towards the end of the month of April, they took their passage to Leghorn. It was a sad departure, the more so that they were obliged to part with their Greek servant, on whose attachment Elizabeth so much depended. Vasily had entered into Falkner's service at the instigation of the proto-cleft, or chief of his clan. When the Englishman was obliged to abandon the cause of Greece and return to his own country, Vasily, though loath and weeping, went back to his native master. The young girl, being left without any attendant on whom she could wholly rely, felt singularly desolate, for as her father lay on the deck, weak from the exertion of being removed, she felt that his life hung by a very slender thread, and she shrank half affrighted from what might ensue to her, friendless and alone. Her presence of mind and apparent cheerfulness was never, however, diminished by these secret misgivings, and she sat by her father's low couch and placed her hands in his, speaking encouragingly, while her eyes filled with tears as the rocky shores of Zante became indistinct and vanished. Their voyage was without any ill accident, except that the warm southeast wind, which favored their navigation, sensibly weakened the patient, and Elizabeth grew more and more eager to proceed northward. At Leghorn, they were detained by a long and vexatious quarantine. The summer had commenced early, with great heats, and the detention of several weeks in the lazaretto nearly brought about what they had left Greece to escape. Falkner grew worse. The sea breezes a little mitigated his sufferings, but life was worn away by repeated struggles, and the most frightful debility threatened his frame with speedy dissolution. How could it be otherwise? He had wished to die. He sought death where it lurked insidiously in the balmy airs of Greece, or met it openly armed against him on the field of battle. Death wielded many weapons, and he was struck by many and the most dangerous. Elizabeth hoped in spite of despair, yet if called away from him, her heart throbbed wildly as she re-entered his apartment. There was no moment when the fear did not assail her, that she might, on a sudden, hear and see that all was over. An incident happened at this period, to which Elizabeth paid little attention at the time, engrossed as she was by mortal fears. They had been in quarantine about a fortnight, when one day there entered the gloomy precincts of the lazaretto a tribe of English people. Such a horde of men, women, and children as gives foreigners a lively belief that we islanders are all mad, to migrate in this way, with the young and helpless, from comfortable homes, in search of the dangerous and comfortless. This roving band consisted of the eldest son of an English nobleman and his wife, 4 children, the eldest being 6 years old, a governess, 3 nursery maids, 2 ladies' maids, and a sufficient appendage of men servants. They had all just arrived from viewing the pyramids of Egypt. The noise and bustle, the servants insisting on making everybody comfortable, where comfort was not, the spreading out of all their own camp apparatus, joined to the seeming indifference of the parties chiefly concerned, and the unconstrained astonishment of the Italians, was very amusing. Lord Cecil, a tall, thin, plain, quiet, aristocratic-looking man of middle age, dropped into the first chair, called for his writing case, began a letter, and saw and heard nothing that was going on. Lady Cecil, who was not pretty but lively and elegant, was surrounded by her children. They seemed so many little angels, with blooming cheeks and golden hair. The youngest cherub slept profoundly amid the din. The others were looking eagerly out for their dinner. Elizabeth had seen their entrance. She saw them walking in the garden of the lazaretto. One figure, the governess, though disguised by a green shade over her eyes, she recognized it was Miss Jervis. Desolate and sad as the poor girl was, a familiar face and voice was a cordial drop to comfort her, and Miss Jervis was infinitely delighted to meet her former pupil. She usually looked on those entrusted to her care as a part of the machinery that supported her life. But Elizabeth had become dear to her from the irresistible attraction that hovered round her, arising from her carelessness of self and her touching sensibility to the sufferings of all around. She had often regretted having left her, and she now expressed this, and even her silence grew into something like talkativeness upon the unexpected meeting. "I am very unlucky," she said. "I would rather, if I could with propriety, live in the meanest lodging in London than in the grandest tumble-down palace of the East, which people are pleased to call so fine. I am sure they are always dirty and out of order. Lady Glenfell recommended me to Lady Cecil, and certainly a more generous and sweet-tempered woman does not exist, and I was very comfortable living at the Earl of G. seat in Hampshire, and having almost all my time to myself. One day, to my misfortune, Lady Cecil made a scheme to travel, to get out of her father-in-law's way, I believe. He is rather a tiresome old man. Lord Cecil does anything she likes. All was arranged, and I really thought I should leave them. I so hated the idea of going abroad again. But Lady Cecil said that I should be quite a treasure, having been everywhere and knowing so many languages, and that she should have never thought of going, but from my being with her. So, in short, she was very generous, and I could not say no. Accordingly, we set out on our travels and went first to Portugal, where I had never been, and do not know a word of Portuguese, and then through Spain, and Spanish is Greek to me, and worse, for I do know a good deal of Romaic. I am sure I do not know scarcely where we went, but our last journey was to see the pyramids of Egypt. Only, unfortunately, I caught the ophthalmia the moment we got to Alexandria, and could never bear to see a ray of light the whole time we were in that country. As they talked, Lady Cecil came to join her children. She was struck by Elizabeth's beaming and noble countenance, which bore the impress of high thought and elevated sentiments. Her figure, too, had sprung up into womanhood, tall and graceful. There was an elasticity joined to much majesty in all her appearance, not the majesty of assumption, but the stamp of natural grandeur of soul, refined by education and softened by sympathetic kindness for the meanest thing that breathed. Her dignity did not spring in the slightest degree from self-worship, but simply from a reliance on her own powers and a forgetfulness of every triviality which haunts the petty-minded. No one could chance to see her without stopping to gaze, and her peculiar circumstances, the affectionate and anxious daughter of a dying man, without friend or support, except her own courage and patience, never daunted, yet always fearfully alive to his danger, rendered her infinitely interesting to one of her own sex. Lady Cecil was introduced to her by Miss Jervis, and was eager to show her kindness. She offered that they should travel together, but as Elizabeth's quarantine was out long before that of the newcomers, and she was anxious to reach a more temperate climate, she refused. Yet she was thankful and charmed by the sweetness and cordiality of her new acquaintance. Lady Cecil was not handsome, but there was something, not exactly amounting to fascination, but infinitely taking in her manner and appearance. Her cheerfulness, good nature, and high breeding diffused a grace and a pleasurable easiness over her manners that charmed everybody. Good sense and vivacity, never loud nor ever dull, rendered her spirits agreeable. She was apparently the same to everybody, but she well knew how to regulate the inner spirit of her attentions while their surface looked so equal. No one ventured to go beyond her wishes, and where she wished, anyone was astonished to find how far they could depend on her sincerity and friendliness. Had Elizabeth's spirit been more free, she had been delighted. As it was, she felt thankful merely for a kindness that availed her nothing. Lady Cecil viewed the dying Falkner and his devoted, affectionate daughter with the sincerest compassion. Dying she thought him, for he was wasted to a shadow, his cheeks colorless, his hands yellow and thin. He could not stand upright, and when, in the cool of evening, he was carried into the open air, he seemed scarcely able to speak from very feebleness. Elizabeth's face bespoke continual anxiety. Her vigilance, her patience, her grief, and her resignation formed a touching picture, which it was impossible to contemplate without admiration. Lady Cecil often tried to win her away from her father's couch, and to give herself a little repose from perpetual attendance. She yielded but for a minute. While she conversed, she assumed cheerfulness, but in a moment after she had glided back and taken her accustomed place at her father's pillow. At length their prison gates were opened, and Falkner was borne on board a felucca bound for Genoa. Elizabeth took leave of her new friend and promised to write, but while she spoke she forgot what she said, for dreading at each moment the death of her benefactor, she did not dare look forward, and had little heart to go beyond the circle of her immediate, though dreary sensations. A fair wind bore them to Genoa, and Falkner sustained the journey very well. At Genoa they transferred themselves to another vessel, and each mile they gained towards France lightened the fears of Elizabeth. But this portion of their voyage was not destined to be so prosperous. They had embarked at night, and had made some way during the first hours, but by noon on the following day they were becalmed. The small vessel, the burning sun, the shocking smells, the want of all comfortable accommodation, combined to bring on a relapse, and again Falkner seemed dying. The very crew was struck with pity, while Elizabeth, wild almost with terror and the impotent wish to save, preserved an outward calm, more shocking almost than shrieks and cries. At evening she caused him to be carried on the deck, and placed on a couch, with a little sort of shed prepared for him there. He was too much debilitated to feel any great degree of relief. There was a ghastly hue settled on his face that seemed gradually sinking into death. Elizabeth's courage almost gave way. There was no physician, no friend. The servants were frightened, the crew pitying, but none could help. As this sense of desertion grew strong, A despair she had never felt before invaded her, and it was as she thus hung over Falkner's couch, the tears fast gathering in her eyes, and striving to check the convulsive throb that rose in her throat, that a gentle voice said, "Let me place this pillow under your father's head, he will rest more quietly." The voice came as from a guardian angel. She looked up thankfully, the pillow was placed, some drink administered, a sail extended so as to shield him from the evening sun, and a variety of little attentions paid, which evidently solaced the invalid. And the evening breeze rising as the sun went down, the air grew cool, and he sunk at last into a profound sleep. When night came on, the stranger conjured Elizabeth to take some repose, promising to watch by Falkner. She could not resist the entreaty, which was urged with sincere earnestness. Going down, she found a couch had been prepared for her with almost a woman's care by the stranger, and before she slept he knocked at her door to tell her. Falkner, having awoke, expressed himself as much easier and very glad to hear that Elizabeth had retired to rest. After this, he had dropped asleep again. It was a new and pleasant sensation to the lone girl to feel that there was one sharing her task, on whom she might rely. She had scarcely looked at or attended to the stranger while on deck. She only perceived that he was English and that he was young. But now, in the quiet that preceded her falling asleep, his low, melodious voice sounded sweetly in her ears, and the melancholy and earnest expression of his handsome countenance reminded her of someone she had seen before, probably a Greek. For there was something almost foreign in his olive complexion, his soft, dark eyes, and the air of sentiment mingled with a sort of poetic fervor that characterized his countenance. With these thoughts Elizabeth fell asleep, and when early in the morning she rose, and made what haste she could to visit the little sort of hut erected for her father on deck, the first person she saw was the stranger, leaning on the bulwark, and looking on the sea with an air of softness and sadness that excited her sympathy. He greeted her with extreme kindness. "Your father is awake, and has inquired for you," he said. Elizabeth, after thanking him, took her accustomed post beside Falkner. He might be better, but he was too weak to make much sign, and one glance at his colorless face renewed all her half-forgotten terrors. Meanwhile the breeze freshened, and the vessel scudded through the blue sparkling waves. The heats of noon, though tempered by the gale, still had a bad effect on Falkner, and when, at about 5 in the evening, often in the south the hottest portion of the day, the air being thoroughly penetrated by the sun's rays, they arrived at Marseille, it became a task of some difficulty to remove him. Elizabeth and the stranger had interchanged little talk during the day, but he now came forward to assist in removing him to the boat, acting without question, as if he had been her brother, guessing, as if by instinct, the best thing to be done, and performing all with activity and zeal. Poor Elizabeth, cast on these difficult circumstances, without relation or friend, looked on him as a guardian angel, consulted him freely, and witnessed his exertions in her behalf in a transport of gratitude. He did everything for her, and would sit for hours in the room at the hotel, next to that in which Falkner lay, waiting to hear how he was, and if there was anything to be done. Elizabeth joined him now and then. They were in a manner already intimate, though strangers. He took a lively interest in her anxieties, and she looked towards him for advice and help, relied on his counsels, and was encouraged by his consolations. It was the first time she had felt any friendship or confidence, except in Falkner, but it was impossible not to be won by her new friend's gentleness and almost feminine delicacy of attention, joined to all a man's activity and readiness to do the thing that was necessary to be done. "I have an adopted father," thought Elizabeth, "and this seems a brother dropped from the clouds." He was of an age to be her brother, but few years older, in all the ardor and grace of early manhood, when developed in one of happy nature, unsoiled by the world. Elizabeth, however, remained but a few days at Marseille. It was of the first necessity to escape the southern heats, and Falkner was pronounced able to bear the voyage up the Rhone. The stranger showed some sadness at the idea of being left behind. In truth, if Elizabeth was gladdened and comforted by her new friend, he felt double pleasure in the contemplation of her beauty and admirable qualities. No word of self ever passed her lips. All thought, all care, was spent on him she called her father, and the stranger was deeply touched by her demonstrations of filial affection, her total abnegation of every feeling that did not center in his comfort and recovery. He had been present one evening, though standing apart, when Falkner, awakening from sleep, spoke with regret of the fatigue Elizabeth endured and the worthlessness of his life compared with all that she went through for his sake. Elizabeth replied at once with such energy of affection, such touching representation of the comfort she derived from his returning health, and such earnest entreaties for him to love life, that the stranger listened as if an angel spoke. Falkner answered, but the remorse that burdened his heart gave something of bitterness to his reply, and her eloquent though gentle solicitations that he would look on life in a better and nobler light, not rashly to leave its duties here to encounter those he knew not of in an existence beyond, and kind intimations, which, exalting his repentance into a virtue, might reconcile him to himself. All this won the listener to a deep and wondering admiration. Not in human form had he ever seen embodied so much wisdom, and so much strong yet tender emotion. None but woman could feel thus, but it was beyond woman to speak and to endure as she did. She spoke only just so openly, remembering the stranger's presence, as to cast a veil over her actual relationship to Falkner, whom she called, and wished to have believed to be, her true father. The fever of the sufferer being abated, a day was fixed for their departure from Marseille. Their new friend appeared to show some inclination to accompany them in their river navigation as far as Lyon. Elizabeth thanked him with her gladdened eyes. She had felt the want of support, or rather she had experienced the inestimable benefit of being supported during the sad crisis now, and then brought about by Falkner's changeful illness. There was something, too, in the stranger very attractive, not the less so for the melancholy which often quenched the latent fire of his nature. That his disposition was really ardent, and even vivacious, many little incidents, when he appeared to forget himself, evinced, nay, sometimes his very gloom merged into sullen savageness, that showed that coldness was not the secret of his frequent fits of abstraction. Once or twice, on these occasions, Elizabeth was reminded, she knew not of whom, but someone she had seen before, till one day it flashed across her. Could it be the sullen, solitary boy of Baden? Singularly enough, she did not even know her new friend's name. To those accustomed to foreign servants, this will not appear strange. He was their only visitor, and le monsieur was sufficient announcement when he arrived. But Elizabeth remembered well that the youth's name was Neville, and on inquiry, she learned that this also was the appellation of her new acquaintance. She now regarded him with greater interest. She recalled her girlish wish that he should reside with them and benefit by the kindness of Falkner, hoping that his sullenness would be softened and his gloom dissipated by the affectionate attentions he would receive. She wished to discover in what degree time and other circumstances had operated to bring about the amelioration she had wished to be an instrument in achieving. He was altered, he was no longer fierce nor sullen, yet he was still melancholy and still unhappy, and she could discern that as his former mood had been produced by the vehemence of his character fretting against the misfortunes of his lot, so it was by subduing every violence of temper that the change was operated, and she suspected that the causes that originally produced his unhappiness still remained. Yet violence of temper is not a right word to use. His temper was eminently sweet. He had a boiling ardor within, a fervent and a warm heart, which might produce vehemence of feeling, but never asperity of temper. All this Elizabeth remarked, and as before, she longed to dissipate the melancholy that so evidently clouded his mind. And again she indulged fancies that, if he accompanied them and was drawn near them, the affection he would receive must dissipate a sadness created by unfortunate circumstances in early youth, but not the growth of a saturnine disposition. She pitied him intensely, for she saw that he was often speechlessly wretched, but she reverenced his self-control and the manner in which he threw off all his own engrossing feelings to sympathize with and assist her. They were now soon to depart, and Elizabeth was not quite sure whether Neville was to accompany them. He had gone to the boat to look after some arrangements made for the patient's comfort, and she sat with the invalid, expecting his return. Falkner reclined near a window, clasping her hand, looking on her with fondness, and speaking of all he owed her, and how he would endeavor to repay by living and making life a blessing to her. "I shall live," he said. "I feel that this malady will pass away, and I shall live to devote myself to rewarding you for all your anxieties, to dissipating the cloud with which I have so cruelly overshadowed your young life, and to making all the rest sunshine. I will think only of you, all the rest, all that grieves me, and all that I repent, I cast even now into oblivion." At this moment the stranger entered and drew near. Elizabeth saw him and said, "And here, dearest father, is another to whom you owe more than you can guess, for kindness to me and the help to you. I do not think I should have preserved you without Mr. Neville." The young man was standing near the couch, looking on the invalid, and rejoicing in the change for the better that appeared. Falkner turned his eyes on him as Elizabeth spoke. A tremor ran through all his limbs. He grew ghastly pale and fainted. An evil change from this time appeared in his state, and the physician was afraid of the journey, attributing his fainting to his inability to bear any excitement, while Falkner, who was before passive, grew eager to depart. "Change of scene and moving will do me good," he said, "so that no one comes near me, no one speaks to me but Elizabeth." At one time, the idea of Neville's accompanying them was alluded to. He was greatly disturbed, and seriously implored Elizabeth not to allow it. It was rather hard on the poor girl, who found so much support and solace in her new friend's society. But Falkner's slightest wish was with her a law, and she submitted without a murmur. "Do not let me even see him before we go," said Falkner. "Act on this wish, dearest, without hurting his feelings, without betraying to him that I have formed it. It would be an ungracious return for the services he has rendered you, for which I would fain show gratitude. But that cannot be. You alone can repay. Do so, as you best may, with thanks, but do not let me see him more." Elizabeth wondered, and, as a last effort to vanquish his dislike, she said, "Do you know that he is the same boy who interested us so much at Baden? He is no longer savage as he was then, but I fear that he is as unhappy as ever." "Too well do I know it," replied Falkner. "Do not question me, do not speak to me again of him." He spoke in disjointed sentences. A cold dew stood on his brow, and Elizabeth, who knew that a mysterious wound rankled in his heart, more painful than any physical injury, was eager to calm him. Something, she might wonder, but she thought more of sparing Falkner pain than of satisfying her curiosity, and she mentally resolved never to mention the name of Neville again. They were to embark at sunrise. In the evening her new friend came to take leave, she having evaded the notion of his accompanying them, and insisted that he should not join them in the morning to assist at their departure. Though she had done this with sweetness and so much cordiality of manner as prevented his feeling any sort of slight, yet in some sort he guessed that they wished to dismiss him, and this notion added to his melancholy, while some latent feeling made him readily acquiesce in it. Elizabeth was told that he had come and left Falkner to join him. It was painful to her to take leave, to feel that she should see him no more, and to know that their separation was not merely casual, but occasioned by her father's choice, which hereafter might again and again interfere to separate them. As she entered the room, he was leaning against the casement and looking on the sea which glanced before their windows, still as a lake, blue as the twilight sky that bent over it. It was a July evening, soft, genial, and soothing, but no portion of the gladness of nature was reflected in the countenance of Neville. His large dark eyes seemed two wells of unfathomable sadness. The drooping lids gave them an expression of irresistible softness, which added interest to their melancholy earnestness. His complexion was olive, but so clear that each vein could be discerned. His full and finely shaped lips bespoke the ardor and sensibility of his disposition, while his slim, youthful form appeared half-bending with a weight of thought and sorrow. Elizabeth's heart beat as she came near and stood beside him. Neither spoke, but he took her hand, and they both felt that each regretted the moment of parting too deeply for the mere ceremony of thanks and leave-taking. "I have grieved," said Neville, as if answering her, though no word had been said, "very much grieved at the idea of seeing you no more, and yet it is for the best, I feel, and am sure. You do not know the usual unhappy tenor of my thoughts, nor the cause I have to look on life as an unwelcome burden. This is no new sentiment, it has been my companion since I was 9 years old. At one time, before I knew how to rein and manage it, it was more intolerable than now. As a boy, it drove me to solitude, to abhorrence of the sight of man, to anger against God for creating me. These feelings have passed away, nay more, I live for a purpose, a sacred purpose that shall be fulfilled despite of every obstacle, every seeming impossibility. Too often, indeed, the difficulties in my way have made me fear that I should never succeed, and I have desponded. But never, till I saw you, did I know pleasure unconnected with my ultimate object. With you I have been at times taken out of myself, and I have almost forgotten. This must not be. I must resume my burden, nor form one thought beyond the resolution I have made to die, if need be, to secure success. You must not speak thus, said Elizabeth, looking at once with pity and admiration on a face expressive of so much sensitive pride and sadness springing from a sense of injury. If your purpose is a good one, as I must believe that it is, you will either succeed or receive a compensation from your endeavors equivalent to success. We shall meet again, and I shall see you happier. When I am happier, he said, with more than his usual earnestness, we shall indeed meet, for I will seek you at the farthest end of the globe. Till then I shrink from seeing anyone who interests me, or from renewing sentiments of friendship which had better end here. You are too good and kind not to be made unhappy by the sight of suffering, and I must suffer till my end is accomplished. Even now I regret that I ever saw you, though that feeling springs from a foolish pride. For hereafter you will hear my name, and if you already do not know, you will learn the miserable tale that hangs upon it. You will hear me commiserated. You will learn why, and share the feeling. I would even avoid your pity. Judge then how loathsome it is to receive that of others, and yet I must bear it or fly them as I do. This will change. I have the fullest confidence that one day I may throw back on others the slur now cast upon me. This confidence, this full and sanguine trust, has altered me from what I once was. It has changed the impatience, the almost ferocity I felt as a boy, into fortitude and resolution. Yes, said Elizabeth, I remember once I saw you a long time since, when I was a mere girl at Baden. Were you not there about 4 years ago? Do you not remember falling with your horse and dislocating your wrist? A tracery of strange wild thought came over the countenance of Neville. Do I remember? He cried, yes, and I remember a beautiful girl, and I thought such would have been my sister, and I had not been alone, if fate, if cruel, inexorable, horrible destiny had not deprived me of her as well as all that made my childish existence paradise. It is so, and I see you again, whom then my heart called sister. It is strange. Did you give me that name? Said Elizabeth. Ah, if you knew the strange ideas I then had of giving you my father for your friend, instead of one spoken harshly, perhaps unjustly of. As she spoke he grew gloomy again, his eyes drooped, and the expression of his face became at first despondent, then proud, and even fierce. It reminded her more forcibly than it had ever done before of the boy of Baden. It is better as it is, he continued, much better that you do not share the evil that pursues me. You ought not to be humiliated, pressed down, goaded to hatred and contempt. Farewell, I grieve to leave you, yet I feel deeply how it is for the best. Hereafter you will acknowledge your acquaintance with me when we meet in a happier hour. God preserve you and your dear father, as he will for your sake. Twice we have met. The third time, if Sybil's tales are true, is the test of good or evil in our friendship. Till then, farewell. Thus they parted. Had Elizabeth been free from care with regard to Falkner, she had regretted the separation more, and pondered more over the mysterious wretchedness that darkened the lives of the only two beings, the inner emotions of whose souls had been opened to her. As it was, she returned to watch and fear beside her father's couch, and scarcely to remember that a few minutes before she had been interested by another, so entirely were her feelings absorbed by her affection and solicitude for him. Chapter 13. From this time their homeward journey was more prosperous. They arrived safely at Lyon, and thence proceeded to Bâle, to take advantage again of river navigation, the motion of a carriage being so inimical to the invalid. They proceeded down the Rhine to Rotterdam, and crossing the sea, returned at last to England, after an absence of 4 years. This journey, though at first begun in terror and danger, grew less hazardous at each mile they traversed towards the north, and while going down the Rhine, Falkner and his adopted daughter spent several tranquil and happy hours, comparing the scenery they saw to other and distant landscapes, and recalling incidents that had occurred many years ago. Falkner exerted himself for Elizabeth's sake. She had suffered so much, and he had inflicted so much anguish upon her while endeavoring to free himself from the burden of life, that he felt remorse at having thus trifled with the deepest emotions of her heart, and anxious to recall the more pleasurable sensations adapted to her age. The listless, yet pleasing feelings attendant on convalescence influenced his mind also, and he enjoyed a peace to which he had long been a stranger. Elizabeth, it is true, had another source of reverie besides that ministered to her by her father. She often thought of Neville, and though he was sad, the remembrance of him was full of pleasure. He had been so kind, so sympathizing, so helpful. Besides, there was a poetry in his very gloom that added a charm to every thought spent upon him. She did not only recall his conversation, but conjectured the causes of his sorrow, and felt deeply interested by the mystery that hung about him. So young and so unhappy, and he had been long so, he was more miserable when they saw him roving wildly among the Alsatian hills. What could it mean? She strove to recollect what Miss Jervis mentioned at that time. She remembered only that he had no mother, and that his father was severe and unkind. Yet why, when nature is so full of joyousness, when at the summer season vegetation basks in beauty and delight, and the very clouds seem to enjoy their aerial abode in upper sky, why should misery find a home in the mind of man? A misery which the balmy winds will not lull, nor the verdant landscape and its winding river dissipate. She thought thus as she saw Falkner reclining apart, a cloud gathered on his brow, his piercing eyes fixed in vacancy, as if it beheld there a heart-moving tragedy. But she was accustomed to his melancholy. She had ever known him as a man of sorrows. He had lived long before she knew him, and the bygone years were filled by events pregnant with wretchedness, nay, if he spoke truth, with guilt. But Neville, the young, the innocent, who had been struck in boyhood through no fault of his own, nor any act in which he bore a part, was there no remedy for him, and would not friendship and kindness and the elastic spirit of youth suffice to cure his wound? She remembered that he declared that he had an aim in view, in which he resolved to succeed, and succeeding he should be happy, a noble aim doubtless, for his soft eyes lighted joyously up, and his face expressed a glad pride when he prognosticated ultimate triumph. Her heart went with him in his efforts. She prayed earnestly for his success, and was as sure as he that heaven would favor an object which she felt certain was generous and pure.